Hey everyone, this is Sophia Sanchez. Welcome to the BioFounders podcast, where I interview the most interesting people from all around the world who are doing, well, biotech stuff, from biohackers to founders of companies, PhD students, researchers, investors. And now I have the great pleasure of having on the show Evan Groover, who is a PhD student at the Savage Lab at UC Berkeley, building genetic engineering tools for plants and microbes. He is an extremely interesting person, as you will get to see in a few minutes, but he's also very kind. We met at SymBioBeta this year and everything. And so this was just like a very casual conversation. I would say we start talking about Johnny Appleseed and how he sort of spreaded different varieties of apples all across North America, or America, I would say. Then we also jump into what we would like to see in the field, what some big and smaller companies are doing, thoughts on hypothetical ideas, I would say. So it's all around, all across the space, but also with the same focus and interest and love for plants and genetic engineering. I hope you enjoy this too. Let's get into it.
I really can't believe that this guy is so obsessed on Johnny Appleseed on
Yeah.
Appleseed.
Had you heard of him like in your life before this point?
Michael Pullen or
Or
Johnny?
Johnny Appleseed?
No, never ever.
Because you hear about he's something of like an American folk hero. You like
Hmm.
learn about him when you're a kid that he's like, but you don't really ever know what he did. It's just like he's a Apple guy, and then but he was a real dude and he was really it's actually I have a book uh I'll just show you briefly that is full of all of the pomological varieties that have been
Wow,
made in the US.
that's so
And they're all like
beautiful.
watercolors. But they are really cool because they point out like he really like led to the propagation and domestication of so many of these different American varieties, which is
Wow.
really inspiring.
Yeah. I think it is mentioned in the book that actually, apples are some of the most, how would you call that? Like the plant, the species that has the most varieties, or one of the,
Yeah,
yeah,
one of the most like, yeah, truly.
yeah, broad and diverse. Yeah. Um, so I really like that what you said, because if Johnny could influence, steer the, I guess, evolution and reproduction and proliferation of a single species of apples, and in that way also influence like the development of societies and the growth of a human populations, then what won't be we be able to do with tools like CRISPR and with synthetic biology? That's just a question, a vision that I ponder, because again, most people don't think of plants or agriculture, or perhaps a lot of people didn't used to think about this field as something that could be very impactful, but in a way it's like one of the most fundamental pillars of society, right?
Yeah, I mean that is certainly the case. Yeah, I think the sense that you get from a lot of people, and rightfully so, is that maybe the botany of desire really dispelled me of this notion myself.
Hmm.
Is that plant science is really slow. You have to wait many generations, maybe years, to produce anything useful, and for many species and for many domains of plant biology, that's still very true. If you work on like a tree, like Johnny Appleseed did, you might wait your entire life to produce, the final product, your own magnum opus. But in the era of CRISPR, that's rapidly changing, right? So we can, now in a single generation of a plant's life, make all sorts of different meticulous and intentional edits. And what that means is that we're able to sort of explore the space of phenotype much more sort of I guess just deeply, and sort of it adds sort of a new richness to the symbiosis that sort of exists between humans and the plants that we grow for food.
When you talk about exploring new possibilities or new capabilities of plants, or just getting to know them better, it comes to mind what Basecamp research is doing for microbes. And I wonder if anything like that has, or if people are trying anything like that for plants, because a large, actually, we don't know most of plants' genomes, right? We haven't sequenced them. We There are some metabolic routes that are still being, well, a lot of them that are still being distilled, and yeah, I would like to see something like that, but I also don't know if that's more of an effort that, if maybe, just as we had a human genome project, we should have like a plant genome project, or a plant's genome project rather.
Well, you're really preaching to the choir. Um, yeah, I think I know of several sort of large scale efforts that are so just for the listener, Basecamp, as I understand it, they're going and sequencing microbes
Yeah.
from all sorts of extreme environments on the Earth and sort of collating a relatively comprehensive or maybe one of the more comprehensive lists of microbial associated proteins that exist out on the Earth. And yeah, I think it would be amazing to do that for plants. There's like, as you said, there's all sorts of diversity that would be nice to capture at the genomic level, and hopefully would help us, either in agriculture or in the domestication of new crops or in the appreciation of biosynthetic pathways to make chemicals or drugs or medicines. Um, and so, yeah, I think, again, I know of a few companies and institutes and organizations that are doing similar projects, but I think we're still at a point technologically where sort of a callback again to earlier, plant genomes are really complicated. They're
Yeah.
much more complicated there than microbial genomes typically, and sequencing them is a pretty non-trivial effort. And so I think a lot of this is owed just to the fact that they're huge and they're extremely repetitive. And so what we're seeing now is that sequencing technologies, especially long read sequencing technologies, are just now sort of allowing us to sequence especially stubborn plant genomes. But sort of the consistent development of sequencing technology will be required, I think, to be able to do this at scale. As will just massive institutional investment, so we can
For sure.
appreciate all the plants that we have on this planet.
Are there any companies that you personally like to follow or that you found interesting in the last couple of years, in anything related to agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies that I think are really exciting in agriculture. I think agriculture, as compared to other fields of just chemistry and biopharma, it's really there are a few sort of incumbent seed companies that sort of dominate the space, and I'm not going to give them any lip service, but we all know who they are. And it's exciting to me, at least insofar as this is good for some people to see them embracing more sort of sophisticated gene editing technology. But I think what really excites me is sort of like a lot of academic and non-for-profit efforts in the plant biology space that are really beyond just like trying to grow more and better food, really sort of pushing the frontiers of what we can be doing with biotechnology. That's the stuff that really gets me exciting. And so, an example of this is I just got back from visiting with some of my colleagues in Nairobi. I was working with the group of Lena Tripathi, who's a really fantastic and inspirational plant scientist. And she and others are working on bananas, and they're specifically trying to revive a species of banana that I am super excited about. So it's this banana that it's called the Gros Michel, and it was sort of the predominant variety of banana in the U.S. up until about 80 or 100 years ago, at which point it went almost extinct by a fungus. But when you go to the grocery store now and you buy like, I don't know, like banana candy, like Laffy Taffy or something, it tastes like a Gros Michel. It doesn't taste like any of the bananas that you can buy in the supermarket in the US. And so all of us know the flavor of the Gros Michel, but none of us have ever had one because it's almost extinct. And so Dr. Tripathi's lab is using CRISPR and other GM technology to breed a variety of Gros Michel that will be resistant to its fungal pathogen so that more people can appreciate that. And so,
That's
you know,
awesome.
de-extincting plants, I mean, to me, that's like the
People
coolest
talk about the
possible
extincted
thing.
mammoths, but like that's still far away, but we are the extincted bananas, so
I mean, yeah, I think bananas are a little easier than mammoths, but
yeah.
I mean, but then the other thing that I want to mention, I think de novo domestication is great. I think, just in brief, I mean, I'm really excited about the application of machine learning and sort of more sort of like model-based approaches at improving the genomes of crops. I think that the space of just data in a crop genome is sometimes so big that it's going to sort of take more of a statistical method than the meticulous gene by gene mind of a human to improve things. Um, the other types of ideas that are really exciting to me in science right now are ideas that will sort of allow us to sort of change the way that we grow food and derive food from seed. And so, like, one of my favorite CRISPR related projects is this project. It's primarily led by a series of labs at UC Davis here in California that are working on making somoclonal rice.
Mhm.
So this is rice, so if you're a rice farmer, if you're pretty much any type of commodity crop farmer in the US, you have to buy seed every year from a seed company. Um, and there's lots of different reasons for this. That seed companies improve the varieties every year. They typically are growing hybrid seeds, which won't, sort of like breed true into the next generation. But in any case, farmers spend a lot of money on seed. And what this team at Davis was able to do with CRISPR is actually make a variety of rice that basically just breeds a clone of itself into the next generation. And so
Wow.
instead of having to buy, seed every year, a farmer, especially a farmer
Mm.
perhaps in the developing world or in the global south, that couldn't afford to buy super expensive, biotech seed every year, might be able to just grow it themselves through successive generations as a result of this process.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that they did it, I'll just mention in brief, is fascinating because they actually made a plant that was able to sort of truly clone itself. It's this process called parthenogenesis,
Mhm.
wherein instead of needing to be fertilized, it just takes its male gamete or its female gamete and it just grows it into an embryo itself. Um, and so processes like this that sort of could be really disruptive to the way that we sort of grow food and could actually, this is sort of a recurring interest of mine, sort of decentralize the way that we are producing food as a species so that it's not just reigned over by a few big companies, I think are really exciting. So, I feel really um, optimistic about the next few years. Or maybe optimistic isn't the right word, but I feel that there's great potential, and I think there's a lot of onus on us in the biological community to capitalize on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd heard about the problem as five companies owning the world seeds. And, what this really means, I think, is that they are, they're creating this very specific varieties and then, they sell it to farmers, right? And then they cannot, regrow them themselves. They have to buy them again. And so what you're saying the team at UC Davis did was creating this specific variety that farmers can actually use without having to, make it super expensive. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that's what you
Okay.
would hope. Yeah, I
Okay.
think, there's still big questions about, who's going to own that technology and who's going to
Sure.
commercialize it. And, this is why I say I don't want to say I'm too optimistic, right? Because the
Right.
history of agriculture is the history of consolidation. And sometimes that's for the better. I think, I'm not always down on these big companies. Sometimes they allow for, awesome humanitarian work. But I think in a lot of cases, it might be better if farmers had, the ultimate control over their seed supply. So
Yeah.
I feel excited about that angle.
Good.
But yeah, I think it'll be an important generation for sort of making sure that we don't lose a lot of the biodiversity on this planet. And I think the general thrust of industrial agriculture perhaps doesn't appreciate that diversity as much as you or I. So
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
just something to keep in mind, maybe.
Because it's also a complicated problem, as you say, because these companies have really, really refined their process and made these crops, resistant to more stuff. And, that's, I think, one of the complex parts, having such advanced technologies. Like when we talk about CRISPR, right? Like, are we gonna prefer to use CRISPR despite its ethical implications in humans, or are we gonna like just let others use them and not be enhanced ourselves. I think it's interesting to see how many of these, general thought experiments also apply in agriculture.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. There's a lot of ethical questions around every turn.
And you mentioned decentralization, which is a topic that I like to dive into as well. I think it not only is the case for genetically modified seeds or um well, it's CRISPR in general, but also we are seeing this with vertical farming, or at least that's what I, heard or understood was the promise of it, being able to grow anything anywhere. And where do you think, well, first of all, I would like to get your thoughts on vertical farming, perhaps not as opinions, but as what you've heard from whether it's efficient enough, why are we just being able to grow, lettuce and kale and not grains, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all sort of most of those answers. The, the answer to that last question is sort of like a techno-economic one, and I
Yeah.
think I'm not an expert on sort of the economics of vertical farming. I think generally the answer that's been doled out to me by my friends in the vertical farming community is that leafy greens are the things that really make sense at cost to be growing. It's land is relatively inexpensive if you actually think about it. Compared to having to operate a super high tech facility with growth lights and certainly I think vertical farming, I guess maybe to answer your real question, is really exciting to me as a synthetic biologist. Because there are a lot of things that I can imagine wanting to do to plants, or like
Mhm.
have plants do for us that maybe you wouldn't want to grow that out, over, millions of acres in the Midwest of the United States or in central Mexico or something. You would want that to be grown. Maybe it's a plant that's producing a high commodity or a high value commodity chemical or something, or it's producing a vaccine
Mhm.
or some type of medicine. These are things that maybe it wouldn't make sense to grow them in a traditional agricultural context, but it would make a lot of sense to grow them in a very specifically curated, sort of intentionally parameterized environment.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that vertical farming really allows for, not to mention the introduction of automation and all sorts of sort of things that allow you to do huge amounts of labor,
Mhm.
for not a lot of actual human work. And so that's really exciting for me. I think when we think about the plant biology lab of the future, it would be amazing to be sort of doing, huge automated experiments that
Mhm.
allow us to really probe plant phenotype in a controlled environment. And so sort of the sky's the limit on that. But I really hope that sort of some of the initial players in this space, from a company perspective, are able to demonstrate to us that it makes sense for some types of products.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about the fact that we can not only use this technology to actually grow, different kinds of foods, but also test different experiments, as you say. And the techno-economic part is definitely something to look at as well. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to tell people. You know, we are seeing that agriculture is still not like the most um famous or sexy area just yet. However, it's something that we humans need. It's indeed a great area to get into to discover, the secrets that plants have to show us and the problems that we could solve through them. So any message to the new generation of plant synthetic biologists?
Yeah, well, I think if I'm not sure that we're ever going to convince anybody that agriculture is the most, the sexiest area to work in, but I don't think it has to be. I think, but I do think that a lot of people are like me that really care about where their food comes from and care about the effect that their food system has on the broader environment and sort of what it does to the ecology of animals and plants and wild spaces on the earth. And so, I mean, I believe that agriculture is one of the best, if not the best place to be working in if you care about those things. And I think there couldn't be a more exciting time to be working in it. I think that there's going to be incredible progress in this coming generation. And so, uh, in the short term, maybe if you're not an agriculturist, what I hope your life is going to be like in regards to plant CRISPR is that you're going to see lots of new exciting products on the market. And so, this will mean actually really just like, to again borrow a term, like really like sexy products, whether it's like fruits that are, much more colorful or much more flavorful or have, different sort of qualities, or just like plants that are able to be grown with fewer, herbicides and pesticides because they have some of their own innate immunability as the result of genetic engineering. I think all of these are really exciting frontiers where we can sort of rethink a lot of the trade-offs that we've come to accept as a species when we think about farming. And so I think it couldn't be a more exciting time to be in this space. And I feel really grateful to have had an opportunity to talk about it with you, Sophia. Thank you for having me on.
For sure. Thank you so much for all your insights and sharing your knowledge with us and perspective, Evan.
And thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode. If you want to listen to more or read more of my work, you can find it as sophia.bio on Substack, or Twitter, Sophia S. Bio, LinkedIn, Sophia Sanchez, and I'll also leave the links for Evan's profiles in the description below. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.